Good evening, everybody. Sorry to make you wait.
Kabot Harav, how are you?
Baruch Hashem, thank you. Okay. Okay, so it says in the Torah, Kol Achet Yemei Chanuka, right? All 8 days of Chanuka, Maskir Shel Chanuka Perush. You have to mention Chanuka. What does that mean? Ala Nisim, right? We say Ala Nisim, B'tfilah, in the prayers, in the Amidah, or Birkat HaMazon, also Birkat HaMazon, V'omro B'tfilah, B'Birkat Modim. So where do you put it inside the Amidah when you say Modim? B'Birkat HaMazon, B'Birkat Haaretz, and Birkat HaMazon, the second blessing, which is Birkat Haaretz. What does it mean, Birkat Haaretz? It's talking about Eretz Israel, right? Praising Eretz Israel. Ve'im lo amro en machazinoto. So the rule is, right, that if he forgot to say it, whatever, for some reason or other, he didn't say it, we don't tell him to go back and pray again. So what does that mean? It's not really so crucial that it requires you to go back and pray again. ורבנו תם היה חוזר אם נזכר שלא, אמרו קודם שעקר רגליו. So Rabbeinu Tam, he says, his custom was that he would go back and do it again, as long as he didn't, right, if he remembered before uprooting his legs. What does that mean, uprooting his legs? That means stepping back from the prayer, right? Once you finish the prayer, you step back 3 steps. But he says the Ri doesn't agree with this, right? So meaning what? That he holds that you don't need to do this, right? You don't need to go back and pray again. There's no reason for it. So he says also the Rosh agrees with the Ri. Right? So the prevailing opinion seems to be, according to the Torah, that we don't go back and pray again. But he says, nevertheless, if he remembered in that blessing, kol zman shelo yizkiru, right? As long as he didn't mention Hashem, the name of God, afilu ben atah Hashem, even if it's just right between the word atah and the God's name, chozer, you should go back. That's the rule. That's the halacha. V'musaf shel Shabbat. So what about musaf of Shabbat? ורבנו חננאל שבחנוכה צריך להזכיר, I'm sorry, I didn't say it right. One more time. ובמוסף של שבת, and מוסף of Shabbat and ראש חודש, right? ראש חודש, שבחנוכה ובחנוכה, צריך להזכיר נס של חנוכה. You have to mention the Chanukah miracle, אף על פי שאין מוסף בחנוכה, even though there is no מוסף in Chanukah. So meaning what? That when you have a regular Chanukah day, there's no musaf. But nevertheless, right, when it comes to Rosh Chodesh, we do mention Chanukah there. Okay. let's see the Bet Yosef. So he says here, regarding the words of the Torah, Beperek Mabem Madlikin, right? This is where the location of this source is. Again, right? Same place in Shabbat, Chavtal Amud Aleph. Umfaresh Ta'ama Mishum de Ben Betfila, Ben Bebirkat Hamazon. So he says the reason is because whether it's prayers or Birkat Hamazon, Tzarich Leomro Bebirkat Ha'odah. You have to say it in the place of thanksgiving. Mishum de Kule Milta de Chanuka Ikara Ha'odah. Because he says, right, the main theme of Hanukkah is thanksgiving. Okay, good. Katuv be'Orchot Chaim, right? It says in Orchot Chaim, Yochanan hu Hashmonai, right? So he says this guy Yochanan, he was Hashmonai, כמו שאומר בספר יוסיפון, like it says in Yosifon, right? Which is Josephus, right? Same guy. In Hebrew we call him Yosifon, in English we call him Josephus. He has a book that he wrote, history book. It pertains to the Second Temple era, right? What happened over there, and the destruction of the temple there, right? He depicts that whole narrative there. Okay, so anyway, ויש אומרים שחשמונאי על דרך יתיו חשמנים והוא דרך גדולה, right? So in other words, he's telling you that there's two different ways of interpreting the word Hashmonai. Some say Hashmonai was a name of a person, right? And he's Yochanan, right? Who was the Kohen Gadol. And his name was also Hashmonai. There's the nickname, whatever. Right? Or there's another way of looking at it, which is that Hashmonai is some kind of a designation, right? Some kind of a character, character. It's a caricature, right? Something like that, whatever you want to call it, right? ויש אומרים חשמונאי על דרך היתר חשמנים והוא דרך גדולה. So what does that mean? What's the meaning of this word? It means like somebody who's important, right? Somebody who's relevant, right? Very person who's big guy, right? Okay. וכתוב עוד שם יש אומרים הרשעה בחיריק, הרש והביאם לזה מה שמצאו בזכריה. So he says there's also another way of looking at it, that the word harish'ah, which means the wicked, right, is with a chirik, which is the E sound, right? Harish, והבאים לזה מה שמצאו בזכריה. So he says it comes from what you find in the book of Zechariah, the prophet. Zot harish'ah. So it says, right, this is the wicked one. Perush balat harish'ah. This is the wicked person, right? Ki milat rish'ah hi shem davar. Because he says the word risha is like a noun, which means the wicked, right? Something like that. Okay. Milat rish'ah hi shem davar. Kimo ki ba'ara b'esh rish'ah. Like this verse, right, is an example of that. אבל יותר נכון לקרוא את הרשעה בשבע. But he says it's more correct to read the word הרשעה, right? הרשעה, right? Which means like wicked, תחת הרש, under the resh. על דברי הפסוק ביחזקאל, right? It's going on the verse in יחזקאל, right? מדרכו הרשעה, wicked ways, from his wicked ways. והוא שם תואר. Right, so that's like a adjective, wickedness, whatever. I don't know. ואם תאמר, למה אומר זדים ביד עוסקי תורתך? Right, so if you're going to ask me, why does it say the word zedim, right, with the people who are comparing them, contrasting them to the people who are learning Torah? ולא אומר davar veifucho, and it doesn't say something which is the opposite. Kemo she'amar bechol acherim, like it says with the others. Yesh lomar ki derech pasuk lakach tichtiv. So he says we say that the answer is that he's talking the way of the verse, right? Because it says zedim helitzuni ad meod mitoratecha lo natiti. Right, so this verse in Tehillim says that even though the wicked, right, tried to take me away from the Torah, I didn't stray away from the Torah. Okay, that's good.
Is that Kabbalah Taraf? Is that verse 119?
Yes, it is.
Thank you.
You got it. Okay, it's a big chapter, right? One of the largest chapters of Tehillim. Okay, so that's that, and then he goes on. "Umash katav Rabbeinu ve'im lo amro en machazin oto," and that which the Torah said, right, that if he didn't say al anisim, we don't tell him to go back and pray again. Kach lamdu arif. This is what the Rif says. Ve'arosh and Tosfot, all these rabbis, the Perek Bamem Arlikin, and also in there in the Shabbat, me'abraita from the Braita Shnuya Sham, which is taught there. Katvu de'achi ita behedya betosefta, and they said, right, that that's what it says in Tosefta. Explicitly, Kol Yom She'en Bo Korban Musaf. They said that any day where you don't have a Musaf offering, Kegon Chanuka, like Chanuka or Purim, or Be'arvit Shachrit Mincha Mitpalel Yudchet, and when it comes to these three prayers of the day, right, Arvit Shachrit and Mincha, they pray the 18 blessings. Ve'omer Me'en HaMe'ora, and he says, right, he mentions the holiday there. Ve'im Lo Amar. And if he didn't say it, we don't tell him to go back. But Tama Mishum Delav Deoraita Ninhu. So he says, what's the reason why we don't tell him to go back? Because he says these holidays, right, are not from the Torah. You know, Hanukkah is from the rabbis. The rabbis made the holiday. Nahagu, so that's the custom. He says, not like this rabbi. That says the Mordechai, דהשתא כיוון דנהגו כולי עלמא להזכיר גם ברך על מנת להזכיר שבייה. So he says, since nowadays everybody, right, is mentions it, right, al nisim. So he says, and therefore he says, שוויה עליו כחובה וחוזר. So he says, therefore, right, it becomes like something important, something crucial, and therefore you have to go back and say it again. But as we said, right, the halacha is not like that. So halacha is that we don't go back and say it again. As right, so the Beit Yosef stresses the reason is because it's from the rabbis, the Hanukkah holiday. Okay. Let's go on. So he says, Mash katav Rabbeinu Tam haya chozer. And now what he says, Rabbeinu Tam used to go back and do it again, right? He had a different opinion. So he says, Nitbaer b'siman reish samech dalet. It was already explained in this chapter, right, which is 294. Okay, good. But then he goes on, right, to quote the Torah, what we said, that if he is still in the same blessing, right, he didn't finish yet, then he should really go back. Pashutu, so he said that's obvious, right? In other words, why wouldn't you want to go back? There's no reason not to go back. If you understand what I'm saying, right? That in other words, since you're not going to make a blessing in vain by going back, because you didn't make the blessing yet, so therefore there's no reason to refrain from that, to refrain from going back. That's what he's saying. Okay, so anyway, right, regarding that, he says it's obvious. In other words, it's clear that we have to go back in a case like that. I hope you're following me. If you don't have any questions, let me know. Katava kolbo. So it says the kolbo she'im shachach milomro b'birkat hamazon. What about if you forgot to say it in birkat hamazon? Right, grace after, right, the grace after the meal or whatever. And he remembered before he concluded lerachaman. So he says what he does is, if he didn't say it, when he gets to the rachamans, right, which is the end of the Birkat Hamazon, the final part, Yomar Rachaman Yasen Yisim Niflaot. You're gonna incorporate it into that right format there. The Allah Nisim, right? Kishem Sheasa Le'avotenu B'Yamim Hahem, like just like he did for our forefathers in those days, Ubizman Hazeh Bim, in our times Bimei Matitya, and then we say right in the times of Matitya, right? V'chen Yaseh B'Purim, and the same thing you do with Purim as well, because also there in Purim we have also Al Nisim, right? We have a different format there, but it's also Al Nisim. So basically, right, that's the way it goes. That we do Al Nisim, and as we said, right, uh, there's a way to make it up somewhat, if you missed it, by doing it in the Rachamans. But that's not really, the right the real way to do it though, because once you're in the Rachamans already, right, it's already, pretty much you're done with Birkat Hamazon, because you're just doing now whatever is a custom, to add there the Rachamans. But really, Birkat Hamazon is already over, by the time you do Hatov Yamativ, the fourth blessing, right? You're done with Birkat Hamazon. So it's really, sort of a makeup, but not really a total makeup, right? It's like, a quasi makeup, whatever you want to call it. Okay. So let's go to Shulchan Aruch and see what he says there. So it says like this, right? The Shulchan Aruch. Kol Shmonat Yemei Chanuka, right? All the 8 days of Hanukkah, Omer Ala Nisim, Birkat Hamazon. So he says, right, Ala Nisim, where in Birkat Hamazon, Birkat Haaretz, in the second blessing of the land, right? Ubetfilah, Birkat Modim. And when it comes to Tfilah, which is the Amidah, you're going to say it in the Modim. Veim lo amar en machazim, right? So Maran Paskins over here, Shulchan Aruch, if he didn't say it, we don't tell him to go back, right? So what does that mean? That not like what we saw, right, in that opinion, which was brought in the Bet Yosef, that you can say it in the Rachamans, We're going to see that in the Ramah, by the way. The Ramah brings it down here. But Shulchan Aruch doesn't bring it down because it's not really an obligation to say it there. It's more like, as we said, it's like a quasi makeup, not really a true makeup. Because Birkat Hamazon is already over at that point. Okay. Anyway, so but he says, right, as we mentioned already, that if he remembered in that blessing, right, before he mentions the name of God, even if it's between like the word Ata and Hashem, the name of God, he can go back and do it there, right? He should, as we said, right? There's no reason to refrain from that because there's no blessing in vain until he says the name of God. So since he didn't say it yet, right, he can still get it in and then finish it off in the normal way. Okay, so says the Ramah here. Hagav yesh omrim sheshachach al nisim b'Birkat Hamazon. So he says some say, right, as we mentioned in Bet Yosef, that if he forgot al nisim in the Birkat Hamazon, כשמגיע לרחמן, when you get to the Rachaman, Yomar, you're going to say like this, Harachaman יעשה לנו ניסים בנפלאות, right? God will give us miracles and wonders, right? The merciful. Harachaman means merciful, right? Because that's what we, right? in Aramaic, right? God is called merciful, Rachamana, right? So that's like that's the same theme. So anyway, right, he's going to make us for us miracles and wonders, keshim she'asita lavotenu b'yamim hahem, just like you did for our forefathers in those days, bisman hazeh, in our time, b'yimei Matityahu, right, and also then it starts with the Al Nisim, the whole right, the text over there with the Al Nisim. So as we said, right, that the Ramah brings it down here. So what does that mean? Bottom line, right? That practically speaking, you're not really obligated to do it over there in the Rachamans. But you can if you want, because there's no prohibition to say it there, because Birkat Hamazon you already finished, and there's no issue with the blessing in vain or anything like that. So you can say it there. It's sort of a makeup, quasi, but not the real thing, because the real thing is to say it in the right place, which is in the second blessing, right? The blessing of the land. Okay, if you have any questions, let me know. Unless otherwise, we'll go forward. Get one more in. Okay. So this one we already read in the tour. Let's see if the bit. Yeah, there's something over here. So it says Bet Yosef, right, regarding what we said in the tour. We said in the tour that even in Musaf, right, which is Shabbat and Rosh Chodesh, we mentioned it there, even though on Chanuka there is no Musaf except when it's Rosh Chodesh. So regarding that, says Bet Yosef, Kachi Maskana de Gemara. It says that's the conclusion of the Gemara there. Beperek Lamed same place, right? Shabbat, Sham. Katuv Sham beHagot Mordechai. It says in the Mordechai there in the Hagot, Nireh she'im lo izkir shel Chanuka. Right. By the way, the word Hagaot means gloss, right? Like a little bit of a commentary there on top there. It's Hagaot, like the gloss of the Ramah, right? In the Shulchan Aruch, same thing, right? It's called Hagaot, Haga. Okay, so anyway, right? Nireh she'im lo izkir shel Chanuka. So it says, right, that if you didn't mention Hanukkah במוספין, in the Musaf, מחזין אותו, that we tell him to go back. ונראה מדבריו, שם שיש חולקים בדבר. So it seems like there's also others who disagree with this. בכל דבריו על שיטת רבייה. So he says he's going according to the רבייה, שכתבתי לאל, that we wrote above, בסמוך, close by, דאילו לדידן, because he says, because whereas when it comes to our opinion, according to our right way, my area Musafin, why would you want to go back from Musafin, right? All the more so you wouldn't want to go back. אפילו ערבית שחרית ומנחה, even ערבית שחרית ומנחה, we don't go back, אין מחזירים. So all the more so we're not going to go back from Musaf. So you see from there, right, that the halacha is not like that opinion. The halacha is that we don't go back from Musaf. All the more so. והרשב"א כתב, right, it says the Rashba, שאלת מי שלא הזכיר בתפילה בשבת, he says, you asked a question, right? In the tshuva, he writes there in a response that whoever didn't mention, right, in the prayers of Shabbat Chanukah, right, Al Nisim, Machazin, we tell him to go back. Even though there is no Musaf sacrifice in Chanukah. So he says, do we say like it's like Rosh Chodesh Shabbat? שחל להיות בשבת, it fell on Shabbat, שאם טעה בברכת המזון, because if he erred, right, in ברכת המזון, and he blessed the grace after meals, חוזר, he would go back. משום בשבת, because on Shabbat, he says, על כורך אכיל, he's eating, right, meals on Shabbat. ואף על גב בראש חודש, דעלמא אינו חוזר. So he says, therefore, even though on Rosh Chodesh, right, regular Rosh Chodesh, he doesn't go back. Ve'achanami lo shana. He says here also it's the same thing. Or dilma eno chozer, or maybe you shouldn't go back. So okay, dilma eno chozer. Anyway, he says teshuvah eno chozer. So he says, what's the answer to that question? Does he go back or not? So he says, does not go back. ואינו דומה להעיד לראש חודש. So he says, it doesn't resemble Rosh Chodesh. Shabbat doesn't resemble Rosh Chodesh. Why? Because that Rosh, he says, Rosh Chodesh Shani shechozer afilu bechol. That would be, he would even return and do it again, even if it was a weekday. בתפילה, לפי, in the עמידה, לפי שיש לו מצד המאורע בעצמו קורבן מוסף. Because he has, right, regarding the holiday itself here, the Musaf sacrifice, אלא לא חייבוהו לחזור. But they didn't obligate him to go back, אלא בטעה במקומות המחויבים בתפילה. Only if he erred in places where, right, there, the prayer is an obligation. אבל לא בברכת המזון, but not ברכת המזון, דאינו מחויב לאכול, because the person is not obligated to eat. What does that mean? On Rosh Chodesh, he's not obligated to eat. There is a mitzvah to eat, right, a meal on Rosh Chodesh, but it's not an obligation. So he says, since it's on Shabbat, that he has to, but on Shabbat he has to eat though, right? That's different. On Shabbat he's obligated to eat the meals, right? So that's why I always remind people, on Shabbat the meals are an obligation, so make sure you eat them, right? Don't try to weasel your way out of Shabbat meals. Make sure you get 3 meals on Shabbat and also malava malka afterwards. Right? Don't skip that stuff because that's very important and also it's an obligation as well. Okay, we spoke about that already several times, why it's so important, according to the Gemara and Masechet Shabbat, blah, blah, blah. Okay. So it says, so it says, okay. He says, so he says, therefore, on Shabbat he should go back. So he says, because now it's an obligation. But he says, even in the prayers which are obligation, and no choser, he doesn't go back. Even for eating, which is obligation, and no choser also doesn't go back. So, right, the bottom line is like this, right? That we don't go back. So, what do I mean? What does that mean? That even though, right, that on Shabbat the meals are an obligation, but they're an obligation from the side of Shabbat, not from the side of Chanuka, right? So, therefore, when it comes to Chanuka, if you missed Al Anisim on Shabbat, right, then you already passed that blessing and went to the next blessing. You don't have to go back and do it again, and in fact, you're not allowed to either, right? Because it will be a blessing in vain. Okay, so let's see the Shulchan Aruch and we're done. It says in the Shulchan Aruch like this. גם במוסף של שבת ושל ראש חודש, right? Even if you have מוסף, which is Shabbat and Rosh Chodesh, צריך להזכיר של חנוכה. You have to mention Chanuka. אף על פי שאין מוסף בחנוכה, even though there's no מוסף in Chanuka. So, as we said, right, that we do mention the Chanuka on Shabbat and Rosh Chodesh, the Musaf, but if you missed it, right, and you forgot to say it, and you went to the next blessing, we don't tell you to go back and pray again, right? This we don't do. And we already mentioned, right, why that is. There's 2 things I can tell you, right? One is because the Hanukkah is from the rabbis, as we said, right? That's why we don't go back if we missed it. And also another thing, which is that what do you call it? The Hanukkah meals are not an obligation of Hanukkah, right? So therefore, since the meals are not an obligation, going back also is not an obligation. That's connected one to the other, you know. So that's the way it goes. Okay, so yeah, let's see what else we got here. Yeah, there's one more here. If you guys want, we can do it. Can you want to take 5 minutes to finish off this chapter?
You know my answer.
Okay. Okay. I won't even ask. Sorry about that. Okay. Okay, you got it. So it says like this, right? That in the end, we're going to see the tour right here, the last tour. Might as well finish it off, right? At the end of the chapter. So, yes, so he says there are those that don't say this Kishim Shasita, right? It's a part of the prayers, right, of the Alanisim. Because we don't say, right, prayer with thanksgiving. ויש אומרים כיוון שצורך רבים הוא, but some say since it's an obligation, it's a need for the community, יכולים לאמרו, we can say it כמו יעלה ויבוא, like right יעלה ויבוא, which is something that we say on Rosh Chodesh, שאומר בעבודה, which we say right in the second to last blessing, which right, is called the the third to last, I'm sorry. Which is called Retzeh, right? Over there. And even though we already said, right, a while ago, we talked about this already. The laws of prayers that a person should be asking for his private needs in the first three blessings, because those are made for praises, right? Also the last ones, right? The last three. We don't ask over there private, right, requests. So then the question is, but what happened over here, right? That we are, right? We're praising God, right? And saying, right, mentioning Rosh Chodesh. So he says, but since it's a need of the public, right? In other words, it's not a private request. It's a public thing, because everybody, has to commemorate Rosh Chodesh. Shapir Dame, so it's okay. Rav Amram, so he says in the Sidur of Rav Amram, who was one of the Geonim, Yeshno, right? It's written there, right? In other words, it appears there. So he says, but the Rosh, lo haya omer oto. He didn't say it, right? Ela haya mesayem ve'asita lehem nisim b'gvurot b'yamim hahem ba'et hazot, right? So he skipped that piece, right, that we just mentioned before. He wouldn't say it. I think also we don't say it either, right? Yeah, we don't say it because okay, well, just my memory. That's what my memory tells me. We don't say it. Okay, hope I'm right. Let's see. Right? We'll finish that off and see. So it says here in the Bet Yosef regarding this tour, right? Zela Shona Tosfot. Right? This is what it says in Tosfot. The Perek Kama de Megillah, the first Perek of Megillah, right, which is Daf Daled Amud Aleph. Yes, she'en omrim keshem lefi she'omro chachamim, right? It says some don't say this prayer. לעולם לא ישאל אדם צרכיו לא בשלוש ראשונות ולא בשלוש אחרונות. So he says the reason is because we already said, right? We have a rule in the laws of blessings, right? The laws of prayers that we don't make requests in the first three blessings and the last three. So this is the reason why the ones who don't say it is because it's also a request, So therefore, right, they say, just like we don't do private requests, we don't do also this request either on Chanuka, right? We don't mention it there. Okay. So he says, but he said, this is ridiculous, he says, this reasoning, he says. Right, the Tosfot. He says it's ridiculous to say like that. He says that only applies when you're doing a private request, but here it's a communal request. So he says that rule doesn't really apply here. That's what the Tosfot is saying. We already mentioned this right in the tour. Same concept. Okay. But he says when it comes to the community though, right, Shara, you're allowed to do it. It's okay, right? A communal request is okay in the last three blessings. That's okay. Right? Aval, but he says it seems like we shouldn't say it for a different reason though. Mishum de'amu chachamim. Why? Because the Rabbi said in Psachim in the Gemara, Kuf Yud Zayin Amud Bet, Techol davar dehave lehava. So he says the rule is like this: that whatever is in the future tiknu belahaba. The rabbis decreed, right, to say it in the future tense. V'davar dehoda'a, when it comes to Thanksgiving, havel shavar. This is already past tense, right? So it doesn't fit in according to that, right? You have two different tenses going on here, contradicting one the other. Uvorchot Chaim, so it says in Orchot Chaim, Katuv, it says there, Omnam kachi nuscha berov atfilot. But he says, nevertheless, right, most of the prayer books, right, have it in there. This text. V'chen nuschat Rambam, Moses, also the Rambam, he says, has it there. Interesting. Okay. Good. Dechol davar dehave le'aba tiknu be'alaba. So he says the rule is that whatever, right, is in the future, they decree to say it in the future tense. Havel shavar. I'm sorry. Wait. No. I'm sorry. I reread the two lines over here. Let me do it again one more time. V'chen nuschat Rambam. So he said that's the text of the Rambam. V'chen katuv b'masechet Sofrim. Also in Sofrim, right? That's what it says in which is part of the Talmud, right? Masechet Sofrim. Hilkach the avad kemor avad or the amar the more avad. So he says, therefore, he says the rule is, right, that you can do either way, right? You want to do it, you can put it in. You don't want to do it, leave it out, right? Either way, you're good. Just like we said yesterday, right? In the name of the Mishnah Brura, we said, right? The Mishnah Brura says, you want to do it this way, do it this way. You want to do it that way, you can do it that way, right? In terms of the order, right? Chanuka and Havdalah, the Mishnah Brura gave you the choice to do either way. Right? Even though we said, right, the custom is really to do more one way than the other, but that's what the Mishnah Brura says. So same thing over here, he says, right, tells you, do whatever you want, leave me alone, right? Whatever makes you happy. And that's pretty much what he says over here in the end. Who is this? The Orchot Chaim, right? That says like that. Okay, so he's telling you like this, right? That since you have both opinions expressed, they both have sources. So therefore, either way, it's fine. Right? That's what it says. Okay, so let's just do a Shulchan Aruch and we're done. So says Shulchan Aruch. Yeah, it says like this. En omrin kashem shasita v'chule. Right. So he says we don't say this prayer. Right. Again, right. He leans towards the side of not saying it. Shulchan Aruch. Right. He says we don't do it. So what is that? What's the reason again? Right. To reiterate, what's the reason why we don't say this prayer? It literally, right, what it means is like this, the words, right? Just like you did for us miracles at that time, right? You should do for us miracles also in our times, whatever, right? In Gaza, right? Whatever, right? Whatever you want to call it, right? Something like that kind of format, right? So that's what it says there in that request. But as we said, right, the custom is, according to Shulchan Aruch, not to say it like that. So therefore, he says, rather, what we do is we conclude like this, right? That you did with them miracles and wonders, right? And that's what we do also, pretty much the same thing. In those times, our text is a little bit different, right, in terms of the wording, but it's the same idea, right? So he says, there's also another opinion that says that we should say it. So, right, the rule is stam veyesh, halacha is like stam, right? We already talked about this several times, right? That the first opinion is not attributed. Second opinion is yesh, omrim, right? Yesh. So therefore, the rule is we go like the first opinion. And in this case, always, that's the rule, pretty much, right? More or less. So therefore, the rule is we don't say it. And the other opinion, which says that we should say it, right? It wasn't right. It wasn't included in the halacha. What can you do, right? It fell out of the text. So therefore, we don't say it, right? As we mentioned already, right? In the Bet Yosef, the reason is because it's a request, and we don't do requests over there. And even though there's an opinion that says we could do requests if it's a communal request, but better not to put it in at all. What do you need it for, right? Like there's a expression like this in Hebrew, in Torah. Shev al ta'aseh adif, right? In other words, when in doubt, throw it out, right? When you're not sure what to do, better just to leave it out. So that's what we do. We leave it out, and therefore, right, we just say the format which doesn't have any requests there. So what does it have? It just has praises, right? We praise Hashem for the miracle that He did for us on Chanuka. That's all we do. Okay, very good, Baruch Hashem. Thanks for coming. Be blessed with wealth, health, happiness. Pray for the success of our amazing, right, warriors that are doing the most amazing job with the help of Hashem, defeating all the Nazis, all the enemies, right, all the subterranean creatures that are roaming around, right, in those tunnels over there. Baruch Hashem, HaKadosh Baruch Hu helps us to take care of them, right, even though they're playing all kinds of games and all kinds of dirty tricks they're pulling over there. Doesn't matter. Hashem protects us. Amen ve amen. We'll see you tomorrow, B'ezrat Hashem. Chazak Baruch, Laila Tov.
Kabbalah Tov. Thank you so much.
God bless.
Thank you, Rabbi.
All the best.